Good morning, everyone, and welcome once again to the main object big book study of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an alcoholic. My name is David. Hello, it's a blessing to be here with all of you. And I'm going to ask our friend Jacqueline to read the preamble for us. I'll put that up on the screen. Um, okay, there we go. Whoops. There you go.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacqueline, and I'm an alcoholic. The AA Preamble. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self supporting through our own contribution. AA is not allowed with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thank you, David.
Jacqueline, thank you so much. Appreciate your help there. And would everyone now join me in inviting God into this meeting by saying the Serenity Prayer together? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So, once again, I'd like to welcome everyone here. I think you are probably aware at this point that we are a line by line big book study. And so, what we're going to do, and I'm going to assume for now that everybody is familiar with the five categories that we work with, and the format is such that I'll share till about 7 a.m. and then open it up for questions and comments. One of the things I said earlier is that we have a lot of ground to cover today. We're still in Bill's story. We are starting on page 7 near the top where it says, "My brother in law is a physician." And there is not only a lot that happens during these however many 5 paragraphs. It's only 5 paragraphs, but there's so much that happens in Bill's life. And there are also, I think, a few terms and definitions that need illuminating, so we'll go on that. And also, there are some patterns going on that I think I really want to bring to the forefront. And what we see now is that Bill, just to create the setting, the context of where we're going to go today, is that um, even though drinking has now taken Bill to the point where he's basically disabled from his alcoholism and dependent on the kindness and the charity of other people, what we see is that his ego and his drinking continue. And but the thing that I'm seeing, and this is a little bit of a new thing, but in the benefit of looking so closely at the text is that certain patterns started to emerge for me that I wasn't aware of before. And specifically, what I'm finding is a pattern of Bill experiencing, as Bill experiences his downfall, he's actually also simultaneously acquiring certain commitments. I call them commitments that ultimately lead to his salvation. And I've talked a little bit with people about this, and most folks I've mentioned it to actually, once you are aware, it's sort of like, boom, why didn't I see that before? And this is exactly what I thought. And what I saw is, as we're going through Bill's story, is that he acquires 4 what I call commitments that lead to his sobriety. And the thing that really jumped out at me was not just that these are patterns that I saw in Bill's story, but then when you look at Dr. Bob's story, you see the same pattern and the same acquiring of these 4 commitments. And then I reflected on my own experience getting sober and the experience that I've had over the years sponsoring a lot of people, and when they are successful and when they aren't. And what I reflected upon was that this process of the same 4 commitments was essential in somebody staying sober. And the 4 commitments that we are seeing here are he has already experienced the commitment, or he saw it as a failed solution, but it is high resolve. And what you see is that people, Bill especially, because he says at one point, "Where was my high resolve?" And for a long time, I took that to mean, well, a high resolve is a bad thing. It just doesn't help you. What I found is that when the 4 commitments are paired together or are taken together, when all 4 are there, they work together to create a kind of synergy. So the first one is high resolve, which just, in other words, means a very firm, almost extreme commitment. The other one, which we're going to see today, Bill acquires self-knowledge. And yes, our text tells us that self-knowledge avails us nothing. And I will agree with that to the point where self-knowledge on its own, as a freestanding experience, will not save us. And unless it is paired with the other 4 commitments. And just to jump ahead, what I noticed is, at first I said there were 3 commitments, but I realized there are 4. And the third is ego deflation, which we are going to see Bill experience in the 5 paragraphs we'll be reading today. And the 4th, which he gets from his friend Ebby Thatcher, is a spiritual plan of action. So what we see in Bill's story is an illustration of acquiring high resolve, self-knowledge, ego deflation, and a spiritual plan of action. And we see that same pattern in Dr. Bob's story. I don't think the order in which you acquire them or you experience them is really as important as just having all 4 of those things. Because what we notice is that when Dr. Bob goes through a similar process, but in different order, however, it's not until he puts all 4 in place that he is able to stay sober. So let's just jump into the text and see how that plays out. So again, we are at near the top of page 7. And it starts, "My brother-in-law is a physician, and through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics." And I have that highlighted. It's sort of contradictory. I have it as a warning in that this is the point that Bill came to. And I also have it, ironically, as a promise, because it is really the place where Bill's salvation really began. And under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. I put it in the chat. I won't go into detail. There are some links there. But just FYI about the belladonna treatment, I had no idea what it was. And I mean, I knew I learned a little bit over the years, but I actually read in depth about it this past week. And it's pretty harrowing. They called it, and excuse the term, but this is what they called it. They called it the puke and purge cure, because you were taking in large quantities of herbs and medications that were basically intended to clear out your system from kind of all ends. And I'll just leave it at that. And it you received hourly doses for up to 3 days. It was pretty intense. So, and again, there are links there if you want to read more about it. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared, and I basically have that as history. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much, and hydrotherapy is pretty much what it sounds like. It's therapy that takes place with water, exercise in pools, things like that. Um, Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill bodily and mentally. And perhaps I was a bit indecisive here because I sort of threw the kitchen sink at it. I've never triple highlighted something, but this is triple highlighted. I have it as a direction and explanation because the information being seriously ill bodily and mentally, I think, is key. I also have it as a warning. And I also have it as a promise. And if you want to make it a question too, sure, put a question mark on the end of it. I'm kidding. But this is where we see that he meets Dr. Silkworth. And what Dr. Silkworth does is he imparts to him the disease concept. And not just the disease concept, but the awareness of we were just talking about this yesterday at GMA Online. The obsession and the craving, which at this point, up till now, Bill was oblivious to. So this is a real eye-opener for Bill. And you can see how he responds. The next couple sentences I have as direction and explanation, so they're in green. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. And think about how critical a piece of information that was, not just for Bill, but for each one of us. In that where we think that the problem is we're just not strong enough, and we can be strong and perhaps even accomplished in other areas of life. But when it comes to this one particular area, our relationship with alcohol, as far as our will or our self-directiveness, our ability to direct our lives goes, we are, you could say, the victim of a serious blind spot. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. And that is in green also. Now, the rest of the paragraph I have in pink as a warning. Understanding myself now, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. And I think I put a link of that for that in the chat. It is a phrase that came from rural America, and Bill was raised on a farm. And what it means is that fortunes were good. Because when the farm was doing good, you could afford to cook a goose. And how that was done was the goose was prepared and it was hung up from the rafters in the kitchen in order for the meat to cure. So if there was a goose hanging in the kitchen or the pantry, that was a sign that times were good. Yes, John.
Morning, everyone. My name is John. I'm an alcoholic, and I've never been to rehab or detox. But Bill's talking about being in detox right now. Bill's mind at times is full of queer, strange, not queer, but strange mental twists. A lot of times he didn't know what the hell he was talking about. He himself was mentally demolished, you might say, at certain times, where he couldn't make any sense, nor could anybody make any sense to him. He had to be cleared physically and mentally of what the effect of alcohol all this time has had on him. So it says that, in the doctor's opinion, we have to be cleared of our mental state before anything can really be effective. So these people are trying to help him, but he had to dry out. He had to straighten out and detox and get all that crap out of his system so his mental faculties could be operative and somebody could actually make sense to him as much as he could understand at that time. Thanks for letting me share.
Thanks, John. So he says, for 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. And when I read that, when I thought about that, there's the second commitment. Yes. And the book is sort of our literature, I should say, is contradictory on this. Because on the one hand, it says self-knowledge avails us nothing. However, don't our steps compel us to do a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves and to get down to causes and conditions? So we can see that a certain level of knowledge of the disease and knowledge of ourselves, is critical to maintaining our sobriety. Yeah, Kathy.
Thanks, David. Just, real quick, you were good in telegraphing, these 4 commitments. And now that we're into the, the self-knowledge thing, and it's just an observation in my own recovery and may apply to others, and it seems to apply in Bill's case, I have to have all 4 of the commitments to move forward. I always had a tendency, still do, to think I'm going to find that one missing piece to the puzzle, and that alone is going to, solve it, as opposed to gathering all the missing pieces, if you will, and recognizing it for what it is, which is progress, not perfection, like movement forward, but never a total, I'm done, I got it, and I'm good to go. Thanks.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that. So moving on to the third paragraph we're covering today. This whole paragraph I have as a warning, and we can see, everything boomerangs on Bill at this point. He says, surely this was the answer, self-knowledge, but it was not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. And that was one of the things that I really related to as well. It's especially when he says his declining moral health. Near the end of my drinking, I just, besides the constant drinking, the way I acted towards people and the way I treated people was, some of it I can't even repeat in mixed company today. And it was just, my drinking, like what Bill is talking about here, was not humorous or heroic. It was at times vile and decrepit and depraved. And that's what Bill is talking about here. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My wearying and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens. And again, there's a link. I won't go into detail, but there is a link in the chat about the DTs. Or I would develop a wet brain, and I believe I put a link in there as well about wet brain. Yeah, there is. And perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. Bill had so much hope for self-knowledge. And quite frankly, I think Dr. Silkworth did as well, because I'm thinking that at this point, Dr. Silkworth must be as baffled as Bill is. But again, let's think about it from today's perspective and what we know, and again, what I've been talking about. At this point, Bill only has 2 of the 4 commitments. He has high resolve, and he has self-knowledge. And he's about to acquire the 3rd. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. Do I have? Yeah, this whole paragraph, the entire paragraph from top to bottom is warning. It was, here we go, folks. It was a devastating blow to my pride. Actually, you could probably double highlight this. This is a warning. But it could also be considered direction. Because what are we seeing now? And it's not just my observation here. Think about how many times in our literature, especially in the 12 and 12, it tells us that ego deflation is essential. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities, of my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining that endless procession of sots. Sots means drunkards, who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all, what I would not give to make amends. But that was over now. And what we see is the crushing of the ego at this point. Yes, John?
Morning, everyone. John again, alcoholic. And I wonder if people have ever heard the term misery parade. This is what reminds me that, joining the procession of sots, drunkards. A misery parade was it was actually a trip around the block outside the liquor store, which had not opened. And what the drunks would do in the misery parade was just continue to walk around the block together, not necessarily together, but in line, just to keep themselves busy until the liquor store opened. That's really a hell of a state of affairs when you've descended to the point where the only thing you can do is just walk around in a circle around the block in the misery parade, along with your other sots, just waiting for the liquor store to open so you can get your fix. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, John. And think about this notion of a downfall for Bill, because just if you remember a couple weeks ago, this was the same guy who envisioned himself as Napoleon, who was going to overtake Walter Hagen. Moving on to the fourth paragraph. Again, all warning. No words can tell of the loneliness and despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. And from the 1939 dictionary, it tells us morass is a situation that traps, confuses, or impedes. It also means another definition, which is fitting here, of morass is swamp. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. And I just realized I may not have mentioned it, at least not that this is really critical, but just for reference, I call this section we're on, this section 6, Quicksand. And you can see why that is a fitting title for where we're at, or where Bill's at. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Complete defeat. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me a bit. By the way, this sentence and the next, I think the first 3 sentences I have outlined as warnings. Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. So, just a note on Armistice Day, which I vaguely knew that, this was what we call Veterans Day now. And just I did some research, and this was on November 12th, 1934. And why that is important is a few paragraphs down, as we'll talk about tomorrow. He gets his visit from Ebby at the end of November. So by the time Bill meets Ebby, he's on a 2-week binge. But the other thing that really kind of drove it home for me was when I looked up exactly what was Armistice Day. And Armistice Day was not just honoring veterans, it was honoring veterans of World War I. And think about it. There's sort of a significance to the fact that Bill started his, what was really his last drunk, on a day honoring World War I veterans. Bill is a World War I veteran. And remember how Bill came home from World War I feeling triumphant. Remember, I thought myself a leader. I saw myself at the head of large enterprises. And so now in 1934, it comes around to the day honoring those people who served. And Bill is, of course, in a very different position. I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. That's warning. The rest of the paragraph is promise. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. And I think I have it in there. The definition is corruption of morals or principles. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the 4th dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. And of course, he's talking about what happened when that fourth piece of the puzzle comes into play. Because he has the high resolve, he has the self-knowledge, he has the ego deflation now. The only thing he lacks at this point is a spiritual plan of action, which is what Ebby brings him at the end of November, which we'll talk about next week. And so with that, what I want to do is open it up for thoughts or discussion. And I didn't mention also, I just for your own benefit, I thought of 3 questions for reflections, and you can answer these when you want to share, or just think about them. In what ways did my alcoholism leave me dependent on the kindness, charity, and or patience of others? How do I see the disease concept of alcoholism at play in my own life and history? And third, what has my experience been with ego deflation? For me, does it need to be ongoing? Nancy, please. Nancy, you are muted, I'm afraid.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Good morning, everybody. I'm Nancy. I'm an alcoholic. Wow, you were right, David, when you said that this is just packed full. This is the whole program of Alcoholics Anonymous right here. And thank you very much for mentioning the 4 commitments when they're paired together. The high resolve, self-knowledge, ego deflation, and spiritual plan of action. And I inserted in here, because alcoholism has been, my craving for alcoholism has been removed. That's not at the top of my list today. What I realized at the top of my list today is my selfishness and self-centeredness. And I just made up another 9th step while you were talking today, because there's some stuff that goes way back that I had never thought of before. So thank you.
Nancy, thank you so much. And Chris, yes, please.
Good morning. Thanks so much. My name's Chris. I am an alcoholic. And well, these questions are great. And so I was my alcoholism left me very dependent on other people and their patients, and having people travel hours to see me in hospitals. And my ex-husband was somewhat of a saint. The patients he must have had trying to get my contacts out. I mean, I'd be, just the daily things that I tend to forget about. And the disease concept has a huge play in my own life and history, because once I get to my core, my alcoholism, I'm able to, it just helps with so many other challenges that I perceived as the problems. But when I live these principles, it's interesting how those other things get healed, for me as an alcoholic, get healed. And my experience, yes, I need ego deflation every single day. And I'm grateful that I have a 10th, 11th step ongoing, that I can continue to see what's blocking me, because I am an alcoholic in desperate need of you, of this message, and this way of life. So thanks all.
Thanks so much, Chris. Okay. Anyone else at this point?
John, alcoholic again. There's a video of Bill Wilson. It's actually a live video of Bill Wilson talking he's a speaker at an AA meeting on the day Dr. Bob died. And he talks about this incident on Armistice Day. He meets someone on a bus The bus breaks down. So while we're waiting, let's go have something to eat. And they go into a country club, a golf country club where Bill used to play golf. That's the reason why he really wanted to leave the house. Got a few bucks from Lois and meets this guy, and they're sitting at this bar, and he's telling him all about self-knowledge. Now he knows the story about what alcoholism is and how it affects him and how he's never going to drink again and everything, and he's telling this guy, and this guy says, boy, you really know, you have a lot of self-knowledge. You really know a lot about yourself. So they finish the sandwich. He's drinking ginger ale, and all of a sudden, the bartender walks up and says, gentlemen, it's Armistice Day. Here's 2 drinks. Here's 2 drinks on the house. It's whiskey and water or ginger ale, whatever it was. And Bill, without thinking, took that glass and drank it. The point is, Bill's trying to talk about that mental obsession where we have no defense whatsoever. And as he did not have any defense at that time, in spite of what he knew and what he was telling this man, he took that glass, drank it down without any thought of what he was saying before. That's what Bill told in that video. He told his entire story, but that's what happened on that Armistice Day. Someone handed him a drink, and without thinking, he took it. And that started off on another spree. Thanks for letting me share.
John, thank you so much. And I hope this is correct. I'm putting it into the chat now. I went to, as John was speaking, I went to YouTube and found the following video of Bill speaking on, I assume it's what John is speaking of, because it's Bill talking on Dr. Bob's death. And Nikki, please.
I always like to put the hand down too. Hi guys, good morning. I'm Nikki. I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, this was really great today, David. I have a note here just for the historian scholars that would be interested in this. Where you started today with his brother-in-law being a physician, this guy's name was Leonard Strong, right? And it says, and through his kindness and that of my mother, this was the beginning of sponsorship, believe it or not. If you do the research on the word sponsor, they sponsored for him to get into the hospital. So when Bill and Bob started doing this stuff, they would sign, and if the drunk would split and take off, they were responsible. So you had to be sponsored to come into, I think this was Towne's Hospital he's referring to here. That was just a little note for the historians. And I love the declining moral and bodily health that you spoke about. That hadn't popped for me. So it's always interesting to hear your perspective on this, really to see my progression into the disease, my downfall, and the things that I was willing to do at the end. Like there was no moral compass that had failed. And then the last thing was the catapulting into the 4th dimension, the description of that and the way Bill writes. And that's, one of the earliest promises in the book where we have a warning, and then we have a direction, and then we have a promise. So I go all the way back to this actual statement when I'm in the 10th step, because this shows me what being restored to sanity looks like for me, right? That promise that we're working towards in a spiritual experience, that I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. I've been restored to sanity. I'm in the 4th dimension. I'm consciously aware of you guys and God and everything going on in my life. It's one of the most beautiful promises, and it's on page 8, right from the beginning of the book. We see directions, we see warnings, and then we see this beautiful promise. So thanks, guys, for letting me share.
Oh, thank you, Nikki. That was outstanding. Appreciate it. Joni, yes, please.
Sorry, everyone, I was muted. Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Joni. I'm an alcoholic. I remember first reading about being catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I thought that was like some kind of like space age, like Star Trek kind of like language, and I couldn't wrap my head around what that could possibly mean. But to me now, looking back at that, once, I went through those 4 things of high resolve and self-knowledge and ego deflation and my spiritual plan, my sponsor going through the steps, I was able to almost be reborn. And I had a life before Alcoholics Anonymous and now my life after, where I know peace and happiness and usefulness, and really a completely different way of life. So I also am grateful to be here today. Thank you so much, Steve.
Oh, Joni, thank you.